Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Craig. I'm the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books. I want to thank you for being a part of our Sunday afternoon small press author reading event. This series started a little less than a year ago. It's been a great opportunity to meet authors from all over the country and bring them together with readers from all over the country. So I'm super excited to have Samuel Moore-Sobel here to read from his memoir, Can You See My Scars, which is published by Mascott Books. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about Samuel. Samuel Moore-Sobel is an author. He's a speaker and a columnist. His debut memoir is the story of a harrowing encounter with sulfuric acid, trauma, and severe burns. He writes about trauma and the road to recovery through the physical, mental, and emotional scars. And a percentage of the proceeds from his books will be donated to the Phoenix Society of Burn Survivors. So it's a great opportunity to check out his book. You can listen in on it today, go to his website later and purchase a copy and know that your money is going toward a great cause. So thank you again, Samuel, for being here with us today. I want to pass the baton to you and let you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are as a writer and as a person, who Samuel Moore-Sobel is.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christy, for having me. It's an honor to be here and to be speaking here in front of this group. What I was telling Christy when we met earlier last week, that one of the great joys of the last several months is being able to talk to groups all over the country through Zoom. And so it's been great to be able to talk to people on the West Coast, to share my story and to hear stories from others and just be encouraged and inspired by that. So it's been wonderful to be a part of that. My name is Samuel Moore-Sobel, and I am an author, a speaker, and a columnist. I live in Northern Virginia, and I work by day as a program manager in the tech industry. I lead a group of program managers in the security space. But in my free time, I speak and share my story and also write guest blogs. I read a column in a local newspaper, and I've also written the book, Can You See My Scars, which is my debut memoir about an accident I was in when I was 15 years old. And before going too much farther, I just want to go ahead and jump in, and I'll read just an excerpt from my book. I'll start with my prologue and then also the first chapter, because I think it just sets the scene and gives some good context on what it is I'm going to be talking about with you all today. Prologue. No one knows what's going to happen next. L. Frank Baum, The Patchwork Girl of Oz. This is not a story I ever wanted to write. I expected that my late teens and early 20s would contain certain milestones: graduating from college, starting a career, buying a home, and maybe even finding someone to love. I did not anticipate that those years would also hold something vastly different: an accident. My accident and the recovery process that followed are detailed in the pages of this book. Some things have been left out due to space constraints, but for the most part, these chapters tell the story of the day that changed my life forever, and, subsequently, the ways in which I have healed. It is not my intention to glorify the choices I made. In fact, I try to highlight the many instances in which I made the wrong decision, or at least could have handled circumstances differently. The purpose of this book is simply to share my experience with you. My hope is that you find something useful for your own journey. I've learned that much of suffering is universal, and adversity is a great equalizer. They have ways of reaching us all, whether we like it or not. The question is not so much if trials will come, but how we handle them when they arrive. My story begins with a cardboard box. How could a simple cardboard box change my life forever, you ask? Just like anything else, I suppose, in an instant and all at once. And then I'll move here to chapter 1. Chapter 1, that fateful day. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Soren Kierkegaard. Tuesday, September 1st, 2009, began like any other day. The morning was clear and sunny, warm even at an early hour. I had one more week until school was scheduled to begin, and I was intent on working my last odd job for the season. Sophomore year was just around the corner, and I felt optimistic at the thought of no longer being on the lowest rung of the high school totem pole. The summer had been a productive one. I spent the months before September 1 working as a camp counselor. Once camp ended, I worked a variety of odd jobs for people in my community until school resumed. I welcomed the opportunity to earn some spending money before homework and extracurricular school activities occupied my time. On that September day, I embarked on a job that I learned about from a man who lived a few blocks from my house. I assumed he had contacted me because he had either seen my name in the community newsletter's Odd Job Squad, where I was just one of the 43 young people listed as ready for work around the neighborhood, or he had seen the flyers I had recently passed out to every house on his street, advertising my availability to complete various odd jobs on behalf of residents. The man asked me to complete a task that sounded simple enough: pack up a garage filled with items and transport them to a local storage unit. A few days earlier, the same man had asked me to stop by his home to assess how much time I thought it would take to complete the project. When I arrived to check out the project on Friday, August 28, I noticed the imposing figure of the man. He was tall, with streaked gray and white hair. After I shook his hand, he launched into conversation. He told me about his previous military service and his political views. He asked me what my political affiliation was and that of my family. He continued talking as he directed me toward the garage. Upon further inspection, the job appeared much bigger than advertised, far more than a middle-aged man could complete, even with the help of a teenager. The garage was filled to the brim with miscellaneous items: Amway purchases, containers filled with tax returns, assorted pieces of furniture. The man ruffled through various items, telling me about each one. We discussed a project schedule starting Monday, August 31. He said he would rent a U-Haul truck, which would allow us to transport the large items housed within his garage. I agreed to begin the job at 9 a.m., and he estimated that we would be done by approximately 1 p.m. We discussed the possibility of inviting a third pair of hands to join us. After I left, I enlisted my friend Blake for help. 2 days later, on Sunday, August 30, the man called to cancel for August 31. He mentioned rain being in the forecast as his reason for rescheduling, before asking if I would be available to assist on September 1. I readily agreed to the change and informed Blake of the adjustment in schedule. On the appointed day, the streak of sunlight enveloping the morning sky led me to believe that the job would go quickly, allowing me to be home after lunch in order to prepare to host a friend for dinner that evening. Upon our arrival, the man introduced Blake and me to his wife. Soon after, we got to work emptying his garage of items as instructed. Shortly thereafter, he informed us of a change in plans. Instead of moving the contents of the garage to the storage unit, we were now supposed to empty the contents of the storage unit and bring all of his belongings back to the house. He cited a desire to save money as his reason for clearing out the storage unit. Then he mentioned something about taking certain items to a friend's house to store in her shed. I was confused. Had I gotten the details wrong in the original plan? We arrived at the storage unit by way of the rented U-Haul and began to empty the contents of the unit into the back of the truck. The unit was filled with extraneous items, much like the garage back at the man's house. As we lugged pieces of furniture and other assorted items, Blake and I initiated conversation with the man. He offered a few stories about his military service and described his current government job. As the day wore on, the man continued making disparaging comments about President Obama. His outlook on the future of America was grim, based on the current political climate. He also shared negative views about being a landlord, detailing difficult encounters with a tenant in a townhome he and his wife had once owned and rented out. After our work was complete, the man received his refund of a previous payment from the storage facility. "Now we have enough money to pay you guys," he said, adding something about how God provides. So that's a little bit of how my book starts there. Eventually, there's more details obviously in the book, but eventually the day ends with me suffering second and third degree burns to my face and arms after the explosion of a box. And I'm rushed to the hospital. And I remember just that first night of being in the hospital overnight and really having to grapple with what the future was going to hold. I wasn't sure what life would look like, if I would be able to, lead a normal life after this. Would I be able to make it through high school or go to college? But I had so many doubts. And I just remember having to ask those classic questions that I think we all ask at some point through our lives, but especially as we're coming of age, such as, who am I? And what is my purpose? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And it sent me on this journey that encompassed the next several years of my life. I had more than a dozen operations to my face, facial reconstructive operations, also had laser operations to try to reduce the density of the scars. But it wasn't just the physical aspect that took several years to be completed. It was also the emotional aspect. I noticed that a few months after the accident, I started to notice some of those mental health symptoms as well, such as irritability and insomnia, and just really having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. And it sent me to go to a psychiatrist, and spent years in therapy working through those symptoms that I was experiencing. At the time, he diagnosed me with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, and really worked with me over several years to really develop the necessary tools to overcome this experience. And he introduced me to this concept that I've carried with me ever since, and I regularly share with audiences when I get the chance to speak. And it's this idea of a toolbox. And the goal was, as he described it, was to be able to develop the necessary tools to be able to withstand whatever came my way. So what are those tools? Some of those tools for me were journaling, and journaling about this experience and writing about what had happened to me. It was also the therapy sessions I was in. It was going on medication for a time. It was being able to have regular diet and exercise, and being able to, be healthy in that area of my life. But it was also sharing my story with others, and finding ways to share this experience, at first with those I trusted, but eventually to take this experience and talk about it in a more public way. For me, in the very first years after the accident, I used to get a lot of questions about what was on my face. With the scars that I have on my face, I have a beard now, so it's covering most of those areas. But typically I would get a lot of questions, and I had to really grapple with how to answer those. And eventually, this was my way of doing that, was finding a way to write about this story, and to share it. I should actually show a picture. I know a lot of people today tell me that I look really, really great, and it's hard to see the scars. And I've healed remarkably since September 2009. I've had a lot of, like I said, surgeries and I'm very grateful for all that the doctors did to give me the face that I have now. But I just want to show what I looked like. And this was just a few days, probably about September 2nd or September 3rd, 2009. And you can see the scarred areas. They are very different from how I look now. But again, just really had to grapple with the scars I had. You can see it was mainly the most troublesome ones are the upper lip, but also the chin as well, but also have them across my neck, on my forehead, and a few on my arm as well. But, really, it was a journey that I think took so long to process, because so much had happened in those years. There was so much that was happening. For me, I know when Christy and I talked last week, she had asked me, why did I write this book? And it was really two reasons. It was one, I wanted to go back and understand what had happened to me, and make sense of all that had happened in that period of time. And it was almost like assembling a tapestry and tracing each thread, and being able to see the ways in which it had affected my life along the way, and really have a holistic and complete picture of what this entailed. But it was also really motivated by the desire to help others. For me, this was a story that I didn't want this to just be this tragic accident that never should have happened. And for so long, that's what it felt like, just this terrible experience that I wish hadn't happened. But being able to talk about this really gave it a redemptive aspect that I don't think I would have been able to have in any other way. And being able to help other people, it's been so amazing to have readers contact me after they've read my book and say that they were impacted by my story. And that, I had a reader tell me that this encouraged him to go back to counseling because reading my book inspired them to do that. I had someone else tell me that they were inspired they saw some of the ways in which they had similar symptoms to the ones that I had experienced. and encourage them to go to counseling as well. And they told me they never would have known that if they hadn't read through my book. And hearing those anecdotes and being a part of that person's journey is so meaningful to me, and has really brought new meaning to this experience, and has helped me, kind of come to peace with my scars, both inside and out, and be able to inject some meaning into this experience. I know for me, writing this book was the most, challenging experience of my life. Those who've written before will know. I've heard it often said it's hard to write a book, but after doing it, it's really hard to write a book. Not so much the first draft, right, but the editing process. It's so hard to be able to find what should be in the book, what doesn't need to be there. And as someone who never had trouble coming up with words, my problem was cutting, was being able to have those words on the cutting room floor of what didn't need to be there, and what needed to stay in the journal, but what were things that would appeal most to an audience. So I had a lot of help from an editor. My now wife actually was really integral in helping me edit and cut down what I had. It was a really long book, and she was able to shorten a good 40 to 50,000 words, which was great. And now it's broken up into short chapters, which hopefully keeps the reader reading as you go through. But again, I just wanted to, make a difference in the lives of others, and to show that even if you haven't had something traumatic happen, like a traumatic accident, I think we all know what it's like to have scars. We all have scars, whether we have them physically or whether we have them emotionally. And in my experience, I felt like those emotional scars were far more impactful to my life in some ways than even the physical scars. And so I want to encourage other people to, not only confront those emotional scars, but also to see that you too can overcome, and that you too can make a difference, and to inspire others, especially during this time. I think that this book, it was already planned for September 1, 2020, on the 11th anniversary of the accident, to be released. But as I was going through the publishing process, COVID strikes. And I remember talking to my editor and really wondering if maybe we needed to put a halt on this project and postpone. At the time, she really encouraged me to keep going, and told me that it'll just be a few weeks or maybe a few months, and then you'll be at the first at the ready to be able to give in-person events and all those things. We're still here a year later, but I'm grateful that I took that advice to be able to move forward in this, because I think that the message of the book is even more applicable and resonates more deeply during this time. So much of my experience, especially in the early part of my recovery, was spent at home. And so I knew what it was like to be at home and not be able to leave the house because of the risk of infection. The first few months I was on homebound tutoring. So teachers came to teach me. They would teach all day and then come in the afternoon and teach me at my dining room table. And so I knew what it was like to not be around people, or have to be really careful about being farther away from people because of my scars. In the first few months, I had to keep it moisturized and have bacitracin on my face and antibiotic ointment. And so, I know what that's like. And so some of this experience over the last year has been reminiscent for me of what I experienced. And so I just hope it encourages people that so many of us have, we've all had our life altered in some way to varying degrees because of this pandemic. And so I hope it just encourages people to keep going and to face the adversity that they have in their lives, and that they would be inspired and empowered to keep going even if it gets hard.
Wow, thank you, Samuel. Thanks for reading the prologue in the first chapter. It's interesting the way that you write in just even the timestamps. It really is effective in giving us that feeling of like building to this traumatic event, of keeping us in that moment with you. It makes it pretty powerful. I really love what you said about assembling a tapestry. That's a really great way to describe writing a memoir in general, but certainly writing about an experience like yours. And um, it makes me just think about memoir. It's all about reflection. And you said like getting the first draft down wasn't as hard as all of the revisions and editing, but that whole process is one big giant reflection on the experience and who you are now, who you were then, who you are now. And I'm just wondering, as you went through that experience of writing it and revising it and pulling it all together, were there any surprises that came to you, or any realizations that came to you about um, the journey or about yourself that you didn't anticipate when you set out to write the book?
That's a great question. You know, I think that there were definitely a lot of surprises as I wrote this book, and was able to reflect on everything that had happened in that period of time. I think that the thing that was surprising to me as I went through is that there were good things that came out of this too. I think, when you're in the mindset of undergoing all these surgeries and you're missing out, I felt like I was missing out on so much of my young adulthood and missing out on high school experiences and even into college of, really, my last surgery was only a little over 3 years ago. And so much of my, teenage years and early 20s was just, I was just underwater in this experience and having to relive it and go through the experience of undergoing surgeries and experiencing that pain all over again in new ways. And I just was able to see it differently in that there were ways in which I felt like, my experience, that I actually learned lessons through this experience that I wouldn't have learned any other way, which was kind of a weird feeling, right? Because on the one hand, I look back and there's it's definitely a book about grief and loss and what that looks like, but it's also a book about lessons learned and triumph and survival. And I feel like my life today in some ways is so much richer and so much more meaningful because of what happened. And that was not something that I anticipated as I went through. And I'm able to kind of see now the ways in which certain, whether it was different people or different experiences, I was able to kind of see how I felt like, there was more people there than I realized as I went across that journey who were rooting for me or were trying to do the right thing. And also it provided, from a faith perspective, it was something that really I was able to kind of go back and look and see the ways in which, I felt so alone during those years and so lost, just from a faith perspective. But going back and seeing, wow, there was providence in so many things that happened, and I just didn't always see it, or there was times where I feel like I probably actively chose not to see it. And so I think the biggest surprise was just seeing the ways in which there was positives that happen, just like anything in life, right? There's good things that come out of something and there's bad things that come out of something. But really, writing the book in some ways helped me embrace the positive. Not to say that I'm happy that this happened, or that I don't look in the mirror sometimes and wish that my former face could be restored. But it just, I'm able to look back at that experience, and it gives me that confidence in a way that I don't know if I would have had. I mean, the great benefit of life experience, right, is being able to look back and see the ways in which I was able to survive and overcome adversity, and the ways that I can do that in the future and carry that forward. And at 15, I wasn't able to do that. I didn't have that life experience to see that perspective. But now in my late 20s, it's different. And so I think I'm able to carry my scars and my story in a different way. And I now see my scars as evidence of survival and triumph, and no longer objects of guilt or shame, but something that I can embrace. And so it's really kind of spurred me on in the future. And the last thing I'll say is I think it's in some ways informed my work. I feel like I'm a better manager because of my scars. I'm more empathetic and more understanding, and have a deeper understanding of people than I would have before. I think it makes me a better husband. I'm a more empathetic and caring and kind husband than I think it would have been. And so I see the ways in which it's really informed the present and informed my future in a way I never could have predicted in September of 2009.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm amazed. You talk about your late 20s, that you've got this great understanding of life. I think it took me about to my late 40s probably to figure all those things out. So it's just such a gift. And um, sharing your experience, like you said, is a big part of recovery, of a lot of different kinds of recovery. Sharing your experience, strength, and hope. Was there, I know you've done a lot of different podcasts. Is there one that was not necessarily your favorite, so you don't have to detract from any of the other ones, but was there one that you really enjoyed, as far as finding that it was an opportunity to make a lot of connections when you shared your experience that way?
Yeah, it's been so much fun doing podcasts. That's been another thing I've been focused on during this time is, it's easy to do. You can do it from your computer and, connect with an audience. And I've been on a number of podcasts. I think the one I will say that was the most surprising and perhaps like was able to make some different connect. I learn every time I do a podcast, I learn about the experience, or I get a nugget from the host, or there's somehow it's imparted. Just telling it again, I make a new realization, and there's these aha moments. Anytime I speak or have the opportunity to do a podcast. But the one that I think it was a whole new spin on it was when I was on the podcast for Sick Boy, which was an amazing opportunity. It's a hugely popular podcast. I'm still shocked that they asked me to come on, but it was so much fun. I really connected with the hosts, and we made a lot of jokes. There was a lot of humor, and it really brought out a humorous side to my story that oftentimes when I'm sharing, I mean, it's a serious subject. It's hard to talk about. It's talking about the worst day of my life and talking about something that's really tragic. But they brought out a lot of humor in it, and the questions that they asked me, it was funny. And there's really funny aspects in the book. As I go through, there's funny experiences with doctors who just say that the funniest things. And in looking back in retrospect, I mean, it was just kind of the funniest situations, and they really brought out that humor to that side of it. Just really, it was really neat to be able to see that side of it and kind of revel in that, and not so much in the heaviness of what it was like to go through this experience. But yeah, like I said, a lot of funny stories with the doctors. I include a lot in the book, just different experiences of doctors and kind of the things they would say and the things that would happen. And it's kind of funny, even in retrospect, I'm still kind of shocked at some of the encounters I had. But it's just really fun to be able to share that part of this story and to just have some fun in doing it along the way.
Yeah, definitely humor is a big piece of recovery, of surviving anything. So that's really awesome. I'll have to look up the Sick Boy podcast. I know you've got a link on your website. Um, I would love to hear you read a little bit more, and I want to also open up questions for anyone who would like to. If you want to post in the chat that you've got a question, or you want to raise your hand. I think if you want to read to us another excerpt, then we can allow people to ask questions after that, and keep talking about your book.
Awesome. That sounds great. I'll read a chapter. I earmarked a chapter just to illustrate again what I was talking about a little earlier with the emotional scars. It's something that I think a lot of people focus on the appearance and how I look. And, there was a whole emotional piece that I think is important to talk about as well, because I think that's what resonates the most with other readers, since we all know what that's like to have emotional scars. So I'm going to kind of read a short chapter that I think really embodies what that was like and describes and distills that experience in just a short chapter. So this chapter title is Unearthing the Past. And the quote I have above it is, "Though he slay me, I will hope in him, yet I will argue my ways to his face." Job 13:15. One night I laid awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling. I couldn't fall asleep. I was thinking about how hard everything felt, how hard school was, how hard it was to get through the day. I felt abandoned by many of my friends. I was desperately unhappy and in a lot of pain. I felt like no woman would ever look at me, see my face, and fall in love with me. I thought about how hard this continued to be each and every day. Pulling myself out of bed each morning had become a chore. Showering was difficult, both physically and emotionally. I hadn't been able to exercise since the accident. I couldn't even be in the sunlight without worrying about my scars. I spent hours in hospital rooms, doctor's offices, and waiting rooms. It was months after the accident, and at every turn, I heard about the need for more surgeries and medical treatments. That night, I wished I had died in the accident. It would have been easier. So many people were telling me how miraculous it was that I had survived the accident. I should have died. At the very least, I should have lost my eyesight. Instead, I scraped by, and it was a miracle, but it felt like a half shell of the life I'd once lived. Death seemed like the only way out. I felt ashamed even entertaining such thoughts, yet they continued unabated. Throughout the day, I was usually able to keep my mind away from suicidal ideations, but at night it was harder to control my tired mind. I continued to wonder whether my life had become too arduous to keep on living. Occasionally, I combated such dangerous thoughts by pacing around the lower levels of the house late at night to avoid waking up the rest of my family. On such nights, I typically sought out the last picture of me from before the accident. It had been taken in May of 2009 and was on display in the living room. It was an image of me wearing an oversized Washington Capitals t-shirt, smiling widely as I accepted an award on stage at my church. During these clandestine viewing sessions, I nearly always pulled the brown frame down from the bookshelf on which it was resting, using my hand to trace the outline of my previous face along the glass. It was also during these tense moments that I decided that suicide was not an option. It would be far too painful for my family. My life had nearly ended once already. I could not end it only a few months into my recovery. My love for the four members of my family kept me alive. I believed they were worth living for, even if I was not.
Wow. You write about that feeling abandoned by your friends and that loneliness. And I know in the introduction you were talking about, um, you know, understanding how it is for others right now during COVID. And I'm just thinking about, you mentioned that your book is great for young adults and younger readers for that purpose. I think during COVID and no one's in school, and there's such a large aspect of socializing and connection when you're in the school and around your friends, and that loneliness that's probably so many young kids are experiencing. And so that's just another piece of your story that I think a lot of people can relate to. Paula, I see you've got your mic off. Would you like to ask a question?
I would. I did not know that Samuel married his editor. And that's interesting because this relationship between editor and author is crucial. And I just wondered, because you literally, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of words you ended up initially in your draft having until it was edited. Do you see any instances or examples where the editor with fresh eyes on the work you've done perhaps helped you in a direction that you went with your book? In other words, I guess you think there was some direction you might not have gone or followed had it not been for your editor, who ended up being your wife, which is wonderful. Editors kind of are sometimes at loggerheads with their authors, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Paula. Yeah, thank you for that. It was a fun adventure. We were dating at the time, and it was a fun adventure. She'd had a lot of experience editing, and so, I asked her to take a look at it, and then she just took on the project and was helping me through that. And there are so many examples where you're exactly right. She would lead just from her fresh eyes and perspective, help me kind of take a different direction on the book, or include something that maybe, draw out a scene or a chapter that would, kind of add and enhance the story. I think for me, I had to learn. I think the big thing that she brought to the project as well was I had to learn what would appeal to others and what wouldn't. And sometimes I had a lot of details that would slow the narrative. And so she really encouraged me on this idea of having those short chapters, of really keeping it short and keeping, taking out words that would slow down the narrative. And so there was a lot of instances where there was a lot of great stories I had in there, but it just wasn't going to add to the narrative. And so there was one of the big areas that this played out was in some of the doctors' stories that I have about the doctors. I had so many doctors' stories that I could have included, but I had almost too many. And so she would kind of encourage me to take out certain ones that just weren't adding to the story, but to really kind of distill those. There was enough that I had in there through the different doctors that I saw that kind of propelled the narrative forward. And so that was a really powerful, experience for me to be able to say more with less and figure out ways to kind of say what I was trying to say through these experiences with doctors and being in the doctor's waiting room, but doing so with not having to use so many experiences, but kind of distilling the most important ones. And that really helped. And it really kept the chapter short. She really helped me with that as well. It was something I was trying to do, but wasn't doing such a great job of. So she definitely brought that direction to the project as well that I think was really invaluable. But definitely with the doctor's stories, I think just really distilling what was important there was really helpful, and just propelling that narrative and you want the reader to continue reading and not get bogged down in too many details. And I think in my first draft, or the draft that I wanted to publish, it just would have been too many details and the reader would have gotten lost. And really, there's also such a thing as too much, that, you can distill an experience and have the reader connect with it, but do so in a way that doesn't necessarily, not all of it has to be in the book itself.
Great question, Paula. Go ahead. I see there's another question.
Hey, Sam, it's Greg Vistica. How are you?
Hey, Greg, how are you? Hey, Joe.
Very good. I'm curious, did you share a copy of the book with the man where you had the accident, or let him know you were writing the book, or do you know if he's read the book and had any comments?
It's a great question. I did not let him know ahead of time that I would be writing this book or publishing this book. I don't know if he's read it. I haven't been in contact with him really for several years now, and so it would be interesting to know if he had read it, or if the woman who's the homeowner had read it. I know others from those high school years have, and some of my former teachers have, but I don't know if he has. It would be interesting to get his perspective on it. It would be interesting, but no, to my knowledge, I don't know if he's read it or not.
Thank you.
And, I'll take a moment here to highlight, Greg was actually one of the first people I talked to about writing a book. And he encouraged me at the time to take notes of the doctor's visits, take notes of he was telling me the things that would be interesting to people. And I've kept that with me ever since. Greg's a great writer in his own right. So I've kept that with me. I appreciate that, Greg, for your advice. It's definitely something that carried this project forward and was integral to putting this project together. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And it's nice to see that it's a success.
Thank you.
I love hearing about just that process. I see Evan, you go ahead, and if you've got a question, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Sam, Evan Maroney. It's a long time no chat. I'll throw back from your high school days. But first off, I just want to say congratulations on the book. Obviously, it's been a while, so I haven't been able to congratulate you. But and it's been great to kind of follow your process in writing this on social media and whatnot. But my question, I'm curious, you kind of touched on it and why you wrote the book and those types of things. But was there a moment since the accident that specifically kind of sticks out in terms of making you want to share this story, because it's obviously such a vulnerable thing to do? Or was it something you always wanted to do since since the accident?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Evan. Great to see you. It's been a long time. Thanks for being here. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, really from the beginning, I remember even just a few weeks after this happened, I remember being in bed one night and unable to sleep, really experiencing this insomnia really from the beginning. And I remember being late at night, it was probably midnight or 1 a.m. And I was just kind of running through this experience in my head. And I just kept kind of reliving it and going through this experience. And, I don't know what it was. I don't know what came over me, but I'd always been interested in writing. I'd always written, local letters to the editor. That whole summer before this had happened, I'd been writing local letters to the editor and submitting those. But, and I'd had a newspaper actually called the Weekly Times as a kid that I would pass out to family and friends that I wrote weekly. So I'd always had a passion for writing from a young age, but I just remember sitting up in bed that night and just saying, I'm going to write about this. And that was my epiphany of this is what I'm going to do with this. And I think that was kind of the moment where I felt like this was a way to, like I said, have meaning in this experience. But it was also something that was confirmed as I went through life. I mean, whether even in high school, I got asked to speak at a statewide SEA conference and speak at local hospital and talk at different events. And people always wanted to know more, and they always had questions for me. And it was hard to distill this experience in a soundbite when, I'd get questions, from random strangers about, hey, what's that on your face? And it was hard to put a 30-second soundbite around it. But it just really encouraged me because people would just come up and they'd want to know more. And they would say, oh, you should write a book about this. And so it was really through that experience of hearing that over and over again that I felt like, okay, well, maybe I have a story here. There was a time where I felt like when I went to college, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I'd spent a lot of time talking about it and sharing about it. And I just felt like I wanted to wash my hands of it. I didn't want to be known simply as the boy who was burned. There was so much more to me and so much more to the interests that I had. And I wanted to talk about something else. But I realized as I did that, and I read a little bit about it in the book, wherever you go, there you are, as the saying goes, right? I mean, I still carried it with me, and I still got questions about the scars on my face, and I still had to deal with those emotional scars as well. And so I felt like, okay, well, I'm gonna write about it. I'm gonna do this. And so it really took a long time to get to the place where I felt comfortable with that. And then of course there's always the doubt, right? You have doubts of, is anybody going to read this? Is anybody going to care about what I have to say? And then it's intensely personal. And I was worried about, putting it out there and people at work knowing about this side of my life, and what had happened to me. And so there was a lot of doubt in going into it, but I just really felt led to do it. I felt like this is what I was supposed to do. And the only way I was going to achieve any semblance of healing was publishing this. And gratefully, the doubts I had have not been realized, which has been great. But long-winded answer to your question, but I think that's kind of where it started, was really from the beginning, and then just kind of getting the tools I needed to be able to write about it. It took some time to develop those, and I didn't feel ready for a long time. It was definitely, so much of the story was happening in real time. Like I said, the last surgery I had was just a little over 3 years ago, and so anytime I'd kind of drop the pen and say, oh, it's ended. Then something else would happen, and then I'd say, oh, that has to be in the book. And so it was something that really just kept going on and on and on. And I also wanted to be authentic in it and really come to a place of peace. And I just wasn't there until a couple years ago. And so really wanted to tell the true authentic story and include the parts in there where things I wish I'd done differently and things that I felt like I did right. And wanted to tell the full, complete story. I felt like the only way this was going to resonate with people is if it was authentic. And so that was really my goal in doing that. And so it was a lot of work to craft it, but so grateful to have it out there now and to be able to share my story with so many others.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that when you're talking that authenticity, that truth, and that vulnerability. That's what makes a story so powerful and so relatable. Definitely, yeah. Evan, did you have something else you'd like to say?
No, I was just going to say thanks for thanks for that answer. It's good to hear.
Yeah, that's a great question. So much of your story is about letting go of, a lot of frustrations, anger, probably. I mean, a lot of it on the journey itself to recovery, but even letting go of, when you talked about the editing process and having to leave things on the cutting room floor, just letting go of those pieces and trusting that what you've gotten as final product is exactly how it's supposed to be. Which is a great metaphor for the journey. Like, where you're at is exactly where you're supposed to be. So that process of letting go, I know you talked about a couple of coping tools that you carry with you, but is there one thing in particular that you really practice a lot when it comes to letting go of some of those doubts or fears or traumas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good point. That is a theme of this story, is letting go and the art of letting go and being able to just kind of leave the past in the past. And I think for me, I had the tendency to just really stew over it and really just remain in that space and relive and relive and relive and go over it and over it and over it. And, really think about all the ways in which I could have done things differently, or things I regretted, or, there was so many things that I had to just really, I just had to let it go. And the way I did that is really, I think therapy helped here too, and just really retraining my mind and just my thinking patterns, and just saying, I'm not going to do that today. And just making that choice of, what's happened is what happened. And I need to live in the present. I need to live in what's happening now. And it's much easier said than done. This was a journey, and there's days where I did this better than others. I mean, I think, another theme of my story is it's a marathon, not a sprint, as the saying goes, right? It takes a long time, but it was really retraining my thinking. And it's something I still have to actively do today. There's times where I have to just let things go and just, this is how this turned out, and I can't change the event. And I just have to retrain my mind to say, hey, I'm going to focus on the present and the future. And being able to write this book is a great way to do that, to be able to say, hey, I can't control what happened to me, but I can control how I respond. And that was a lesson I had to learn over and over again. I mean, there was so many things that happened through this experience, not only just the physical scars, but so many things of whether the hurtful things other people said about how I looked, some of the fallout from just even in my own family and some of the extended family members. And there was just so much to this experience. But being able to write about it and use my voice and tell my story and share what I wanted to share was really empowering. And it really did help me kind of write the record and just leave it and be able to leave that. And so now when I have certain thoughts, it's much easier to say, hey, I've been there, I've done that. The book is out there, it's impacted people. And I don't find myself going back to that place in the same way. There's always different things that are triggering from time to time. Right now, I'm in the process of recording my audiobook. And it's reliving that can sometimes be hard, and going through that experience of rereading for certain parts. But it's just so different having that distance and being able to just all the the thought control that all the work I've done to do that over the years has really helped me now in the present be able to just leave the past in the past and focus on the present and in the future.
Yeah, you illustrate very well the power of writing, writing for yourself and writing for others. There's just, such great healing that comes from it, and the ability to distance yourself from events so that you can recover. It's just, that's why we do the work that we do, and that's why we share it. That's awesome. I would love to hear. So we just have about 10 minutes left. So there are a couple of things I'd love to know. And if other people have questions, certainly just holler, unmute your mic. Um, I'd love to know just a little bit about the Phoenix Society, if you have just a one or two things you want to share about it. But I'd also love to know what you're reading these days. What continues to inspire you, other authors that continue to inspire you.
Yeah. So I'll take the first part first. The Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors is an organization that is his mission is to serve the burn survivor community and caregivers and family members of burn survivors. And it's just such a wonderful organization. I did not know about them until only a few years ago into my journey, where I came across them and was so excited at the thought of meeting other burn survivors and just being a part of this community. I felt like, I went several years before I was in my early 20s before I met a fellow burn survivor. So I felt so alone in that as well. And, really was hungering for the opportunity to meet other burn survivors, and had the opportunity to go to the Phoenix World Burn Congress, which is the largest burn survivor gathering in the world. And it's held every year. And it's an amazing experience. I went to the one in Dallas in 2017, and I included it in the book, but it was a life-changing experience. And it was actually kind of the capstone for me on the healing process of being able to come to a place where not only hearing the story of others, and seeing the similarities in my experience, hearing some of the ways in which, some of the struggles I had in romantic relationships, other burn survivors had, and just kind of how we approached that and how we viewed ourselves and the insecurities. And there was just this long list of things that really resonated with me, and it was really powerful. But it was also just an amazing to be around burn survivors. They are the kindest, most gracious, authentic people I've ever been around. I mean, just being in a room of burn survivors, it's hard to describe. It was just so life transforming. And so I had the opportunity to write for the Burn Survivor magazine, and just really be just really a part of that community has been amazing. And so I wanted to use some of the proceeds of this book to really propel the work that they do, and for the work that they're doing for other burn survivors, really because I feel like I didn't have that in the first few years of my experience, and I want to make sure others do. And so they have a variety of programs where they do young adult programming. They also have people that go after a burn injury, they'll go and visit, in the wake of that accident, and they'll be there in the hospital. They provide such resources. They also have virtual events and burn survivor meetings and things like that. It's just an amazing organization that has done so much for me, and I want to do all I can to continue to support them so that they can do so much for other burn survivors and their families as well. And then the second part, what I'm reading, I'm the type of person where I'm in the middle of several books at once, which is just a bad practice because I'm always, going back and forth. My wife is much more disciplined where she'll read a book and then go to the next one. But I've read a number of different books. I'm in the middle of right now. I really like reading memoirs. So I just finished actually Flashback Girl by Lee Guire, who's a fellow burn survivor who has such a powerful story. Really resonated with her story, but also just so many things in her book that resonate so deeply. She talks about her parents and just the difficulty in having a relationship with her parents, and she talks about not only her experience as a birth survivor, but as a wife, as a mother. There's just so many amazing things in that book. So that's been my favorite book that I read just recently, and was able to feature it in my column and help promote that as well. A fantastic book if you're looking for a good read. And then I'm also in the middle of a couple different like management type books, how to be a good manager. I'm in the middle of Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which is a really cool book to read through and just kind of understanding how to manage people and how to do that while being really authentic and clear, but also doing so in a way that doesn't lose your humanity in the process. So that's been a really fun book to be in as well. And then I'm always in the middle of like nonfiction historical books. I really enjoy that. I just recently read a book about the presidency. I always love reading about the American presidency. So doing that. And then I'm actually in the middle of John Meacham's book about Andrew Jackson, which is another great book that I've been enjoying as well. So I like to read a lot of different things depending on how I'm feeling or what I'm kind of searching for in the moment. But always love a good book. And it's been great to have some more time to read during the last few months, taking some time and really being more disciplined about that, because it's just such a great time to be able to dive into different stories.
Yeah, for sure. Those are great. Thank you for sharing all those titles. They sound like um, great reads. Even the Radical Candor. I mean, I'm not in management, but there's a lot of great things that, boy, your experience can translate into your work, and I can see how that would be really important to relate those two things together, like you talk about authenticity and not losing your humanity when you're trying to manage others, and the compassion that you carry forward. So it's been so cool just getting to know you and to hear about your story. I don't know if there's one more excerpt that you want to read quick, or if there's anything else that you want to say to wrap up the reading. We've got about 5 more minutes left.
Yeah, I'm happy to as a good wrap up, kind of read the epilogue to my book. I think that would be a good kind of wrap up. Epilogue, September 1st, 2019, a note on the 10-year anniversary of the accident. It is never too late to be what you might have been. George Eliot. It is hard to put into words how I feel 10 years after the day my life changed forever. In many ways, the accident is no longer a part of my daily experience. I've gone on to buy a home, build a career, and reach many of the milestones that mark adulthood. I've even found someone to love, someone who loves me back, a beautiful, wonderful girl who I intend to marry. Yet despite how different my life looks today in comparison to 10 years ago, plenty of reminders of the past still exist. To this day, my scars are often the first attribute people notice about me. I still receive questions from strangers and acquaintances about my appearance, and I am still, even to those who have known me for nearly a lifetime, often remembered as the boy whose face was burned. No matter how the rest of my life unfolds, I may always be that boy. While I've gone on to experience many adventures since my teenage years, the accident is still the most notable, life-altering, and traumatic experience of my life. This event has shaped my worldview and forced me to reevaluate many areas of my life. I had come to grips with not only how I looked and how I felt, but also how to decipher the meaning of the scars I carry. I have learned through this experience that scars not only identify past struggle, but present triumph. I no longer live in fear of what others will say to me, nor do I continually dwell on what I lost. I do my best to wake up each morning and praise God for the gift of life that He has given me. No matter what happens over the course of a day, I can rest in the knowledge that joy is within reach, even in the midst of adversity. During my high school years, I used to ask God to take away my scars. Nearly every morning during the moment of silence in my high school, I bowed my head and ran my hand over the red marks, praying for my face to be restored. I no longer ask God to take away my scars. As the years have unfolded, a journey without scars becomes harder to imagine. Wishing for them to disappear feels like wishing away a part of myself. Nowadays, I'm not sure I'd be willing to part with my scars. They are part of me now, a part of my story that I no longer want to eradicate. Despite the growth and healing I've experienced, I still live with the consequences of the accident. I still have to be careful about spending too much time in the sun. When I do venture out, I have to apply a copious amount of sunscreen and wear a hat. I use a neti pot to drain my sinuses each morning and many nights while regularly taking a slew of vitamins to combat my propensity for sinus infections. Much of what lies ahead as it pertains to my injuries remains unknown. How my sinuses will react in the future after such high exposure to sulfuric acid remains a mystery. Early on, doctors said my risk for skin cancer was high. Dr. Cohen's prediction of an unintended facelift on half of my face remains unappealing. As has been true along so much of this journey, a lack of answers is par for the course. Yet, despite this, I'm determined to carry on. I want to share this story to maybe help others while doing my best to live a life worthy of the one I've been given. I would be remiss if I did not admit that part of me still longs for the full restoration of my face. I will likely always feel that way. Yet my sense of longing lessens with each passing year. After years of wrestling, I feel as if I finally come to peace with myself. Perhaps when Jim Maxim shared with me that it took 10 years to heal, he was speaking of something far deeper than his physical appearance. Writing this book has been one of the most challenging, gut-wrenching, and all-encompassing experiences of my life. I have poured my heart and soul into this work, and have spent years trying to determine what to say and how to say it. I remember a conversation I had a few years ago after sharing my story with a group. A woman from the audience approached me and said, "I was diagnosed with something chronic. I needed to hear what you said tonight. You gave me hope." Such words have stuck with me in the intervening years. They remind me of the power of hope, the importance of sharing our stories with others, and how we need each other in our journeys toward healing. I humbly submit my story to you, and I hope you'll do the same by sharing your story with others. I believe that the world can be changed one story at a time. It starts with you.
That's great. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for being here, Samuel. You're just an awesome young man. I'm so happy that I got a chance to meet with you and to speak with you and hear about your story. Again, the links for Samuel's website and where you can purchase a copy of his book are in the chat. I hope you guys take a look at those things, listen into some of the podcasts that he's got listed on his website as well. I'm definitely going to check out the Sick Boy podcast. And I hope you'll show up again for future readings with hiddentimberbooks.com. We've got more coming down the line, and we're starting to fill up our calendar in May and June. It's been a great opportunity to meet authors like Samuel and to hear stories that I might not normally get to hear. So thank you again for being here. Thanks everybody for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. And we look forward to seeing you online again soon.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Christy, for having me.